We are now in week 11 of the NFL season, and to say that there have been teams that have been a disappointment would be an understatement. So in this video, I wanted to go over 4 teams that have underperformed so far based on what their expectations were going into the year. And starting out with probably the most disappointing team so far this year, we got the New York Jets. Now the Jets went into this year with Super Bowl aspirations. The Aaron Rodgers era was never going to be long, and because it only lasted 4 snaps last year, the Jets' plan was to run it back with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, and that would fix all of their problems, right? But, based on what we saw last year, I never thought this team was going to be good enough to compete for a Super Bowl. I thought that, at best, the Jets would get a 6th or 7th seed and lose in the first round of the playoffs. Last year, the Jets proved that they were far more than a good quarterback away from being contenders. Now, I don't want to just blame the coaching staff because the Jets' problems go all the way to the top. It starts with an owner and a GM who have made a lot of bad decisions. Drafting Zach Wilson and not surrounding him with good coaches, hiring an offensive coordinator because he's friends with your quarterback, and this is a franchise that hasn't made the playoffs in 14 years. And ironically, the last time the Jets made the playoffs was the year Aaron Rodgers won his only Super Bowl. And I feel bad for Jets fans because so far through 10 weeks, they're 3-7 and currently have a 13% chance of making the playoffs. And this is after they traded for Davante Adams, signed Hassan Reddick to a new deal, and fired Robert Saleh. It was evident that Saleh was not a good head coach, but he is a great defensive mind, and since his departure, the Jets' defense has just been terrible. The Jets are coming off a blowout loss to the Cardinals in a game where they didn't score a touchdown. This team has found a way to lose games this year that they should have won, plain and simple. A missed field goal against the Broncos and a late fourth quarter comeback from the Patriots has, in my opinion, squashed the Jets' playoff chances. If they had found a way to win those 2 games, they would be sitting at 5-5 and currently be in a playoff spot. So I think it's safe to say Rodgers is not coming back next year and that another rebuild is coming. And next we head to Jacksonville, Florida to talk about the Jaguars. So if you had told Jaguars fans that this team would be 2-8 after 10 weeks, be last in the AFC standings, and have a 1% chance of making the playoffs, you'd probably get met with a lot of angry reactions. There was a time last year where the Jaguars were 8-3 and were sitting at the top of the AFC with the number 1 seed. And boy, does that seem like a long time ago, because the Jags finished the year by losing 5 out of their last 6 games and were eliminated from the playoffs. Since then, it's been nothing but downhill for this team. The Jags have not been able to get going this year, and what must be frustrating for fans is that Trevor Lawrence just became one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. And I understand that the QB market is what it is, and Trevor is definitely not the only issue in Jacksonville. But I think a good question is how much of the season struggles do you put on Lawrence and how much do you put on the head coach? Doug Peterson came into Jacksonville in 2022 and seemed to give this team a spark and also seemed to help with Trevor Lawrence's development. Things seemed to be going pretty well and the Jags would end up making the playoffs that year. They even pulled off one of the biggest comebacks in NFL history by defeating the Chargers after being down 27-0. Unfortunately, Doug Peterson's time in Jacksonville is most likely coming to an end. There have been reports that he's lost the locker room, and whether or not that's true, you just can't have a team with this much talent and be one of the worst teams in the league. And at the beginning of the year, the Jaguars owner came out and said that this was the best Jaguars team he ever assembled, both players and coaches, and let's prove it by winning now. And it's interesting how that statement looks so bad just a couple of months later. Jacksonville's season is basically over, and I think next year you'll see a change at the head coaching position. Next up is the Dallas Cowboys, and where do I even start with the Cowboys? The Cowboys season ended last year after a complete beatdown by the Packers. And to be honest, I don't think the team's recovered from it. Jerry Jones said at the beginning of the offseason that they were going all in this year, which a lot of people assumed they were going to get more pieces and finally help this team get to the Super Bowl, or at the very least an NFC Championship game. Jerry didn't even reach out to Derrick Henry during free agency, and that has to be one of the biggest mistakes he's made in the last few years. Cowboys' run game has been terrible this year, which is no surprise because they brought back Ezekiel Elliott, who is far past his prime. And what's funny is that the team with the best rushing yards per game so far is, you guessed it, the Baltimore Ravens. Cowboys' rushing attack is not the only issue with this team, though. Their run defense has been one of the worst in the league. Mike McCarthy's on the hot seat and will most likely be getting fired at the end of this year. So things have been pretty bad in Dallas this year, and it looks worse when your star linebacker publicly questions your head coach's work ethic. On top of that, Dak just became the highest paid quarterback in NFL history and is now going to miss the rest of the year with a hamstring injury. CeeDee Lamb also got a huge contract this offseason, and he's had a slow start to the year. And with Dak being out, it's hard to picture a world where CeeDee is one of the top receivers with Cooper Rush or Trey Lance throwing him the ball. Do I even need to mention the glare problems at AT&T Stadium? This has been an issue for years, and when your star receiver misses a wide open catch because the sun is in his eyes through a window, that's just simply unacceptable. Jerry Jones is one of the richest owners in the NFL, and he can't figure out a solution for this, really? This team has not made the NFC Championship game in almost 30 years, and until Jerry Jones either sells the team or steps down, I don't see that changing. The Cowboys are currently 3-6, and I think it's safe to say this season has been a dumpster fire. And last but not least, we head to the Midwest to talk about the Chicago Bears. Now, Bears might have had the biggest offseason in the entire league. They traded for wide receiver Keenan Allen back in March. Then, the Bears took Caleb Williams first overall in the 2024 draft in hopes of finally getting their franchise QB. And because the Falcons took Michael Penix Jr., Rome Odunze fell to the Bears at number 9. So Chicago had a lot of hype going into this year. Not only did they have their best quarterback prospect of the last few years, but they also had a new exciting receiver to pair with veterans like Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. The Bears' offense had a slow start to the season, and it wasn't until week 3 where Caleb Williams had his first passing touchdown. And you can definitely see the flashes and talent of Williams so far, but the problem has been his decision-making and constantly getting pressured. In this past Sunday's game against the Patriots, Caleb was sacked 9 times. And if you're a Bears fan, you have to be worried about what this is doing to his confidence. He has not thrown a touchdown pass in almost a month. Fortunately for Bears fans, earlier this week, offensive coordinator Shane Waldron was fired, but I think the problem is also with the head coach. Matt Eberflus should have been fired at the end of last season, and Bears fans are becoming increasingly less patient with their head coach. Chicago is in another cycle of having a young QB with a head coach that is on the hot seat. Not to mention, the offensive coordinator getting fired mid-season is just another thing that Caleb Williams and the offense have to adjust to. You're never going to set your team up for success when you start building a young roster with a head coach who has shown he is not good enough. Now, I never expected the Bears to be contenders this year, but so far, their offense has been horrendous. Caleb Williams looks lost. He's getting pressured and sacked constantly, and they have not scored a touchdown since the loss to the Commanders, which, looking back on it, seems to be the game that has broken this team's confidence. Eberflus' lack of accountability after the Hail Mary in Washington and very apparent lack of leadership skills is what's going to get him fired, and at the end of this year, most likely. I don't think it's all negative in Chicago, though. They're still a young team with a lot of talent, and they just need better coaching, and the front office needs to surround Caleb with a great offensive mind. As of right now, though, things are not looking great in Chicago.